what I'd like to speak about is attachment theory and the way that attachment theory has influenced the sorts of things I think about in terms of early childhood, the way I think about children, and the way I understand the workings of early childhood services. Attachment theory is a theory of intimate relationships. It tells us about the emotional bonds that children form with their parents, the people who are close to them, their siblings, and these bonds and relationships form from the earliest days of their lives, and are important bonds, throughout life. So we all still have very important attachment bonds. If you fell over, on your way home from work one day, who would you call? That's one of those attachment figures in your life. And so it tells us about all kinds of things about our lives, and it's an important theory that influences everything that we do, but it's particularly important for the babies and toddlers who come along into our childcare centers. And the person that started it all was John Bowlby, who's called the father of attachment theory, but he's worked with many, many other people and researchers, people who've read his work, have extended his work, have started to apply his work to professional work with children in early childhood settings or parent-child relationship services. It's really been picked up by a lot of different professions and has made a big difference, I think, to children and their families. Attachment theory speaks to the emotional aspects of children's lives, how children manage their emotions, how they experience emotions in those close relationships, and how they see and learn to feel about themselves as competent, capable, and lovable human beings. And that affects so much of their lives in terms of how they interact with people, how they learn. So that it's a major theory in terms of children's learning as well as children's emotional well-being. These things are very important in our work.
I'm a developmental psychologist, and I'm going to talk about Urie Bronfenbrenner's bioecological systems theory of child development, which I think is a unique and wonderful worldview of how we can understand change and children's learning. So I'm going to talk about Bronfenbrenner's theory, and I think in some ways it's a very big picture theoretical perspective about children's development. It brings together the nature and nurture that people have always talked about with respect to development, because it really has a very strong focus on the unique genetic and biological basis of kids' behaviour, particularly talking about the temperament of kids and how that interacts with the opportunities that they get in the environment with interactions with caregivers. Bronfenbrenner's theory has often been conceptualised as a model of the nested Russian doll. At the heart is the child. The child is the centre of his theory. And then gradually it moves out from the focus on the child to a very broad cultural and policy perspective on the influences on children. So the basic core, aside, when we move out from the child, is the settings that the child spends most time in, and in which the child engages in increasingly complex exchanges with the people, the objects, the symbols in their environment. And it's that increasing complexity to the interactions that the child has with people, objects, symbols, that bring about change and in children's learning. Bronfenbrenner's theory moves from the child to the microsystems such as the family and childcare centres or preschool programs, then to the exosystem, which there's a lot of jargon, I guess, in the theory, but still when you come to grips with it, it makes perfect sense in terms of this nested model. So the exosystem is where the child may not be a participant, for example, the parent's workplace, but which indirectly has a very strong influence on outcomes for kids. Mum comes home unhappy after a terrible day at work. She's not going to be ready for lots and lots of fun and cuddles. On the other hand, Mum comes home from work and she's incredibly satisfied. She's had a great day. So her interactions with her child will be of a very different kind to what it might have been if the day hadn't gone well. So while the child isn't in that context, it still influences the child. There are just two more elements to Bronfenbrenner's theory, and they are the macro system, so the cultural values, norms that influence what happens at home or at preschool, how things are organised, and then the national economic systems are always also important, because the policies that government have in place, the resources that they offer to families, mean a lot in terms of the quality of life in families and also the quality of preschool and childcare programs.
And I really like the kind of thinking that Bronfenbrenner introduced way back in the 70s. I remember reading his book when I was a graduate student. And his book is quite hard to read because it's written in very scientific terms, and other authors since then have taken his work and translated it into terms that are much easier for us to read and understand. But I really like that idea of not just looking at the child as a single unit and what we do to the child, but looking at the child in the context of the family and the community and the culture and the country, and that all of those things have an impact on the child, and the child has an impact on all of those things. And of course the neurobiological research is actually showing us that. It's showing that if we create an environment for children that is stressful, if we create and allow to continue ghettos where children grow up with extreme disadvantage, if we allow that as a society, we're creating the next generation of children who will have multiple problems, and that next generation of children is going to have a major impact on the success of our society. So we have a responsibility as a country and as a culture to not just say, this is my child and I'm only going to do the best for my child, but to reach out to all children and to take responsibility for ensuring that all children have as positive an early start in life as possible. And that means in our own private lives, outside of our professional lives. It may mean reaching out to the neighbour. It may mean offering babysitting to the neighbour so that she can go and have a bath and relax one afternoon a week. It may mean doing more than just teaching our students or teaching the children with whom we're working. It may mean living the talk in our lives outside of our professional lives. And that means really thinking about what's important to us, to each one of us as an individual. It means that we have to think about, how do we work with children? Do we work with children in ways that are respectful? Do we work with children in ways that honour their agency? Do we work with children in ways that honour their rights? Because so often when we're working with children, we tend to fall into a deficit approach. We think about, well, children who are 2 or 3 years of age should be doing these kinds of things, and Johnny's not doing these kinds of things, therefore I need to teach him. So we fall into that kind of deficit approach where we're looking to fill gaps in Johnny's knowledge. Whereas in fact what we should be doing is looking at Johnny and how he lives in the environments in which he lives. How does he cope? How does he manage? And try to turn our thinking around so that our teaching is not about finding things that Johnny can't do and fixing that for him, but finding ways to ensure that Johnny's rights are met.
There are 3 general types of early childhood development theory. Maturation theory holds that development is the same in children as in other animals. It's based on biological imperatives, meaning that there's automatic development in children as they grow. The second school of thought is around environmentalist or behaviourist theories, and they hold that children learn by being given the proper stimuli and reinforcements. Finally, there's also a constructivist view of development. This is based on child-centred idea of learning, where children create meaning by actively engaging in their world. Developmental theory is a key tool for early childhood educators, but it's just one tool that can provide a theoretical basis for understanding how children learn in the early years. If developmental theories are used in isolation from other theories, they can become problematic for a number of reasons. So developmental theories can position educators as experts, people who stand back and observe children's behaviours and their thinking to make interpretations of what they're actually doing. The problem with this sometimes is that developmental theories set up norms of behaviours, sort of universalities of what children will and won't do at particular ages and stages. So educators really need to think about what tools different theories provide to them so that they can look more holistically at children's capacities at particular ages. For example, developmental theories work well when used in conjunction with other types of theories such as sociocultural theories, critical theories and post-structural theories. These theories really help us to question universal norms. They help us to think about what it is we're seeing in terms of children's holistic development, not just whether they can stack blocks or go to the toilet by themselves. It really looks at the child more holistically. When educators observe what children are doing using only developmental theories, they can really focus just on individual children rather than groups as a whole. So this can really position children separate from other interactions that are going on around them in terms of interactions with other children, with spaces, materials and environments. Sometimes with developmental theories, observations really isolate the context, meaning you're not getting a whole picture of what children are capable of doing. For example, if there were a group of children playing in block area and a teacher was using developmental theories to observe what the children were doing, they might focus on one child's capacities in terms of development with hand strength. They might be looking at how the child stacks the blocks, or if they're counting. What can be taken out from this is that there are interactions going on, interactions between children and the materials and the space as a whole. If there's a focus on the individual child, the teacher may not see the whole picture of what's going on. What's going on could be a range of social interactions between children. There could be power plays between different children. There could be particular interactions or preferences to do with styles of learning and the way children use particular spaces in different ways. Another issue with developmental theories is that there's always a focus on becoming, of children building capacity to reach the next stage. This can really take the focus away from children being, of their capacities as individuals in the moment. When we think about outcomes, developmental theories often classify what children are able to do into boxes. There's very set, defined standards based on social, emotional, cognitive or language outcomes. This again classifies children in very limited ways and doesn't allow for a holistic view of what the child is actually capable of doing, not only on their own, but with their peers and with other adults. Developmental theories do provide teachers with a useful tool in understanding how children learn and develop over time. A difficulty with developmental theories is that it sets up universalities, a series of norms of how children will behave at particular ages and stages. For some children who don't fit these norms, they can be classified as being delayed or lacking in some way. In terms of social justice and inclusive outcomes for children, developmental theories can really limit the way we see some children's capacities and how we interpret what they're capable of doing. For educators, it's really important to consider that developmental theory is only one set of theoretical tools to use in practice every day with young children. By using a range of theories, it ensures that our practice isn't limited and that we're not taking away from children's capacities. When using developmental theory, we know that it is an essential base of knowledge that all educators need in their work with young children. It provides a frame for understanding how children learn and develop over time and can also help us to flag if children are experiencing difficulties as they grow and learn. But I think it's important to realise that developmental theory is just one theoretical tool. Teachers should have a backpack full of theories that can be used in side by side and in conjunction with each other. If using developmental theory, it's important for educators to build in questions about their work and provocations about what they're doing and how they're interpreting what children are learning.